The Battlehosts. Be a better gamer, build a better community.
Welcome to The Battlehosts, a podcast and website dedicated to helping you become a better 40K gamer and to build a better community of players. I'm your host, Mark, and tonight it is just me. Tonight I'm going to talk about my experience at the LVO 2020. It's going to be a short podcast just to kind of recap what I thought of the event and kind of what happened as I was there. Unfortunately, both Matt and Sean could not make it to LVO this year, kind of at the last minute. Their plans changed, and it was just me from the Battlehosts that went. Luckily, a lot of my teammates were there, and several local people from Boise also traveled. So it wasn't like I was all by myself, but in this case, none of the Battlehosts except myself went to Las Vegas Open. So tonight, I'm going to talk about my experience at LVO. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on iTunes and YouTube to catch all latest episodes. You can follow us on Facebook under The Battlehosts. We do have a YouTube channel now. Right now, I'm just putting the podcast up there, but I'm hoping to do something interesting with it in the future. So look for that space soon. We have some plans. We have some ideas. If you'd like to support The Battlehosts for as little as $1 a month, please visit patreon.com/thebattlehosts. If you'd like to join for $3 a month, you can access our Discord chat where we discuss all things related to the hobby. Tonight's episode, like I said, I'm going to talk about the Las Vegas Open 2020. I'm going to talk about my experience of the event, what I did well and what I learned, both as a player and then kind of like what my expectations are for next year and like what do I want to do and get out of LVO moving forward. This is probably, I think this is my 5th time going, and every time I kind of like tweak my expectations a little bit, and every time it's just a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about my plans are also for the rest of this year, and also just what we plan on doing as far as a competitive year calendar. Now, before I jump into the Las Vegas Open, I want to hear a word from our longtime sponsor, DGT.
We all love Warhammer 40K, but sometimes games just take too long. Using a game timer is the best way to make sure games finish and for both players to get an equal amount of time. Check out the Easy Game Timer from DGT, manufacturers and designers of the timers officially sanctioned by the International Chess Federation. It's simple to set up and customize, and your settings are saved when it's turned off. It's easy to use with a large moving lever for changing turns and a clear digital readout. It's the most affordable and high-quality game timer on the market and is the choice of most 40K events. Whether you want to practice before a big event or you just want to be a better player, the Easy Game Timer from DGT is the perfect game timer for your 40K events. The DGT Easy Game Timer is available from many online retailers. Wholesale pricing is also available for tournament organizers. Check these fine clocks out at dgtnorthamerica.com. Speed up your game and improve your play with the Easy Game Timer from DGT.
Okay, and I'm back. So the LVO was held at Bally's Casino. This is I think the 3rd or 4th straight year they've done it. I think 4th straight year. They took a year off where they went in the Flamingo, but Bally's is Bally's. If you've been to Bally's before, it is right on the Strip. It is next to the Paris Hotel. It's not one of the newer ones. So if you go to like Aria or the Cosmopolitan or the Bellagio or Wynn, you see kind of what the new casinos look like. They're huge. They're really glitzy. They have tall ceilings. You don't necessarily smell the cigarette smoke and alcohol that you typically do in a lot of other casinos. The newer ones are actually really pretty glamorous. Bally's ain't that. It is kind of more of a classic casino, but it has a great location, and it's really right in the middle of the Strip. It's across from the Bellagio, and it's next to several others. So its location and its price really are the selling points for an event like the Las Vegas Open. So there were over 800 players in just, I think, the competitive 40K championship. That's not to say that there were other players at the Friendly and the Narrative and other events as well. So as far as 40K players go, I think we probably reached 1,000, depending with all the different events that were there. So it is the single largest competitive event in the world. But even beyond just 40K with Age of Sigmar and the other things there too, there's just, I don't know if there's very many other places where there's that much of a concentration of 40K players. The Las Vegas Open, having seen it grow over the years, it every year it's like the biggest event, and it seems to keep getting bigger and bigger. However, it's funny because the room that has all the tables, when years ago, it held all the 40K players. Last year they moved some of the 40K players out. Now this year, that huge ballroom area had the entire all of it was stuffed full of tables for competitive 40K championships. So it took up the whole space. It hadn't before, but now it takes up everything. So there really isn't any other room. They could probably get clever with it, but at this point the event's kind of capped out at however many they had. So it'd be interesting to see if they grow, if they have to stay there, because at some point that room's not getting any bigger. And there were tables, basically the whole place was filled with them. So the thing about it is that there's enough room to move around. It doesn't feel like it's a maze. The tables aren't jammed in there. There's actually plenty of room. Every table there's rows of 4. There's chunks of 4 tables, kind of end to end, and 4 is just enough so that you can kind of run around to the other side of the board if you need to. It doesn't feel cramped, and the actual room that they have it in has really tall ceilings. It's a really big open space, so it's a little bit loud, as you'd expect when people are all talking, but it's actually it's a really pleasant place to game in. There's water stations, there's all the things you kind of expect. So as far as a gameplay experience, it doesn't get oppressively hot. It's not excessively cold. It's a little loud, but there's plenty of room to move around in. So it's definitely a nice environment to play. Now the terrain on the tables, the top 100 had the same table layout, so they did a little bit differently this year. The top 100 players had the same top 100 tables had the same table layout, and you had a map, and you can kind of switch it around if you wanted to, which is fine. But what that meant was they had, I think, from like 101 to 200 and something or whatever. Frontline has a bunch of variations of different themed tables. I think there's probably about 6 or 7 different kind of themes. There's a Necron table, there's an Orc table, there's the table that I played in, which is kind of just generic building ruin table. Because I was at the kind of middle tables for pretty much the entire event, from like the over table 100, but like 100 to 180 was kind of where I bounced almost every game. Pretty much played on the same exact tables each time. Now, part of that might be just the pairings and the way they kind of got messed up, which we'll talk about soon. But most of the tables I played on basically had, in fact, all the tables I played on, I think, all had the same terrain. It had a big enclosed box ruin in the middle. It had 2 L-shaped ruins on either like opposite corners. It had smaller little enclosed boxes on the other corner, and then it had some area terrain and forest kind of in the different areas of it. So it was decent terrain. It was good, and it was just enough, I think, it was just the right level to ensure that it doesn't feel like it was sparse. It could have had more, but actually I think it was fine to play on. I just found myself playing on the same one each time, and it was probably just how I got paired and how I got assigned to tables. So each round was 3 hours like it was before. And, in past years, slow play was an issue. And so slow play was kind of the thing, the theme from like the last couple of years of LVO, where basically what slow play is your opponent intentionally plays very slow because their list typically wins if the game only goes to like turn 4 or 5 or even 3. If they know that your list has to go all 6 turns in order to really win so they can kind of swing the game around, they might intentionally play slow. And that's kind of the problem with slow play is it's one of those things where you don't know if somebody's doing it on purpose or if they're just not very, they're just a slower player. It's one of those things that could be unintentionally done, but it's really hard to know what the motivations are from people. So slow play is one of those things that's been difficult to solve. There are obviously a lot of chess clocks that kind of solve it, but I didn't see a lot of slow play, and I think really it's because the game right now doesn't involve. I mean, a lot of the lists I saw were quite straightforward and extremely lethal, and had some level of movement, but it wasn't like we saw with orcs moving, 200 models or whatever. We saw a lot of more elite shooting armies, at least the ones that I faced. And I just think that when all you're doing is rolling dice to shoot, occasionally you'll get into assault, but for the most part, you're basically looking at pretty simple moves, and you're not moving an entire army across the board And in that case, slow play just doesn't become an issue because you're not spending the time doing the things that kind of slow the game down. So I haven't found it was an issue, and it certainly wasn't this year. So there's 6 rounds over 2 days, Friday and Saturday. There's a 4th game for like the top, all the undefeated players play another, like a shadow round, and then they make the top 8. There's also other events at LVO. There's an RTT on Sunday. Oftentimes I will play in the RTT, and this year I did. There's also painting classes, and then there's also like a narrative and friendly events. And so if you wanted to go and play in a friendly or a narrative event, either one, you could, especially like the friendly event, but you could play. There's a Friday RTT that you could play with a little bit tougher variation of your list. And then you could play in the friendly event on Saturday and Sunday, because those tend to go over Saturdays and Sundays. So Paul, one of our listeners and one of the players local to this area, that's kind of what he did. He took an Eldar list, and he had one variation of it that was a little bit tougher than the other. And so his tougher variation, he played in the RTT, played in the friendly event with, slightly toned down version. It was the same army, but, he kind of moved some models around. So if you're not interested in playing in the championship event, you could play in the friendly event and also get an RTT in there as well. Now, I have played in friendly and narrative events before. That was the first 2 LVOs I did. That's essentially what I was playing there, because I was worried about getting tossed into the Shark Tank with, the competitive event. And also I didn't know the game very well. So I was still pretty new to it. And I just didn't feel comfortable playing at a competitive level. So my first couple of years were friendly and narrative. And they were really fun experiences, but I don't know that I'll ever go back to playing in those events again. And the reason why is that once you become pretty good as a player and you understand, the things that your army does really well, I just find that it's probably better to be matched up with people that also have that across the table, that, that also are there for the competition. It's difficult, I think, to run a friendly and a narrative event, and I'm sure the guys did a great job. I don't actually know how well they did, and I know they do sort of pre-list submissions, and they really try to dial it in, but I will say that it's a difficult thing to run because you're trying to limit the power of people's armies. You're trying to force a conversation between those players, and they're strangers, right? You don't really know who's coming to an event. The nice thing about playing in a competitive event is that you don't have to apologize for any of the stuff that you take. You just take what is legal and you play. The conversation has been had. Your person across the table from you understands he's in the same boat, he or she. They can take whatever they want to take within legal limits. And so it's just there's a cleanness to competitive play that I kind of appreciate. And there's a level of competition that I also appreciate. And there's also just a level of list knowledge and rules knowledge that you typically find in a competitive event. So I appreciate it, and I usually, even though I might be playing people that are, that may have better lists than me or just better players, I find that I become a better player when I play in competitive events. A friendly or a narrative event to me is a lot of fun, but difficult to run. And I think I'd rather do that locally with people I know, because that just feels like it'd be a little easier to manage. And I actually have done that, and it is a lot of fun. We've run a lot of casual events here locally, and so it's difficult to me to envision going and playing, narrative or friendly against strangers. And I've done it, and I've met some really cool people that way. But I think I would rather just go with competitive. And at the end of the day, even if I don't win all my games, even if I don't win any game, I know I've gotten the best from the people I played against. Let's talk about my road to the Las Vegas Open. Now, my typical MO is just me personally. I usually take Thursday and Friday and Monday off. And Thursday's our night that we fly in, and we are only about an hour and a half plane ride from Boise to Las Vegas. So we fly out Thursday, usually in the afternoon, and then we fly back on Monday sometime in the morning if we can. And so I'll take those 3 days off, and Thursday is usually the day where I am kind of packed. I'm packing, getting everything ready, and I'll take that morning and double and triple check stuff. If you listen to our last episode about preparing for the LVO, everything I do is that's all the stuff that I'm doing. I'm going through literally my checklist of items and saying, okay, do I have two tape measures? Do I have all the dice that I need? Have I printed off all the sheets of all Army List stuff? So I'm really going through everything and pulling it all together. And it does take a while because I don't want to miss anything. Thursday, though, this year, I was painting and I was really trying to finish painting an army. I was way, way, way behind typically what I do when I get an army ready. I usually have my army ready before Thursday of LVO. However, this year I wasn't. And so once again, I found myself painting in the hotel room the night before a big event. So to know why this happened, I chose Eldar. And I chose an Eldar army that I had some models, but I didn't have all the models. I have a lot of Eldar, but the specific units and things that I took that I wanted to take, I didn't have them. I didn't have enough of them. So I chose Eldar as my army for LVO because if you go all the way back to October, when the Space Marines came out, I'm building a Space Marines army. I still have I have a bunch of Space Marines that I'm going to build for my Space Marines army. At some point, though, if you think back in the fall, there were the Iron Hands came out, the Imperial Fist came out. There was a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of changes. Some FAQs were a couple weeks late. Things were kind of getting bounced around, and I started to kind of get nervous because I've actually never played Marines for more than a handful of games. Like I've tried them out a little bit, but I've never. It's been years since I've played Marines, and I certainly haven't played them in this edition. So I knew that any Marine army that I took, I would need to get some serious practice in. And when things start to get kind of chilly outside and fall starts approaching, I think LVO, I thought, okay, I can run Marines, but I didn't know what I wanted to take. And I found myself building lots of different units all over the place just because I wasn't sure where I wanted to land. And I wasn't ready with Marines. So in October, I basically bailed. I paused. I hit the pause button for my Marine army. I stopped it. And then I thought, okay, what am I going to take? There's 3 armies I can take. I can take a Knight list. I can take an AdMech list, or, I can take like a Knight and some AdMech. Or I can go Eldar, Craft World Eldar specifically. So in November, I was deciding between these 2 armies and kind of looking to see what I had. I was building a lot of lists. I was building a lot of AdMech lists. I practiced at least once or twice. I tried out some Craft World stuff, but essentially what happened when Psychic Awakening came out is in November I decided, okay, I'm going to go with Eldar. I looked over at my display case. I was painting up some robots to go with Call for my AdMech list, which I thought was actually a pretty good list. And I looked over at the glass case and saw the orange and gray Eldar that are my Eldar that I've had for years, and said, Eldar are going to be good. The Psychic Awakening has given them lots of tools, and I'm seeing that there's lots of interesting units that are different or that are better now. I'm going with Eldar. So November, I decided on Eldar. And then December, especially after the chapter proof points changes, I started looking at different units that I wanted to play. One was Wraith Lords. I had 2 painted Wraith Lords, but I painted them a long time ago, and I just didn't like the way they looked, and I wanted to have 3 Wraith Lords, 2 or 3 Wraith Lords in a list. So I needed to paint 3 Wraith Lords because I wanted to repaint and change the look of the Wraith Lords, because the 2 that I had, I just didn't appreciate. I didn't like them. I wanted to run Wasps. I had tried out Warwalkers, but I like the idea of Wasps because they can deep strike, and they also have fly. Support weapons, I wanted to run more support weapons. I only had 3, and I wanted to run 9 at the time. I actually went down to 6 eventually, so I got 6 support weapons. I wanted to run Dire Avengers, so I needed to paint 10 Dire Avengers, and also I want to run Storm Guardians and an Autarch. So altogether, right around December, I started to kind of pull together the different units I wanted. I had to paint 3 Wraith Lords, 2 Wasps, 6 support weapons, 10 Dire Avengers, 8 Storm Guardians, and an Autarch. And so I was kind of working on these things and testing things out, and then the list was due in January. So when I submitted that list in January, basically everything was built, but not everything was primed. So everything was built that I needed to go, but I had a big chunk of it that I hadn't even primed, and I had like 2 weeks to do it. So about 3 weeks to do it. So what my list was, what I submitted, I actually had never played the specific version of this list. I had played the individual units, but I kind of made some last-minute changes before I submitted it. So my list for the Las Vegas Open 2020, it was Craft World Eldar. I had a battalion and this was a custom craft world with expert crafters and masters of concealment. Expert crafters means you reroll to hit and reroll to wound. It doesn't say missed. It doesn't say failed. It just says reroll 1 hit and reroll 1 wound. And this is both close combat and ranged, which is actually really powerful. And the Masters of Concealment means you get cover outside of 12 inches. So in this battalion, I had a Farseer on a Skyrunner. I had a Warlock on a Skyrunner. I had 2 units of Dire Avengers. The Exarch, they're 5 men each. The Exarch had 2 Avenger Shuriken Catapults. And the Exarch power was Bladestorm. Now, Bladestorm is if you roll any 6s within the unit, that's an additional hit. So typically there's 12 shots. There's 12 shots coming out of that with the Exarch because he's got 2 Avenger Shuriken Avenger Shuriken Catapults. And so 12 shots with the Expert Crafters kind of rerolls and the Bladestorm, you're getting about 12 hits typically. So, and of course 6s are rending, and so you're also doing rending damage with that. I had a unit of Storm Guardians, and the Storm Guardians were just 8-man unit. It was just the cheapest troop slot to fill out. I had 2 Hornets with Hornet Pulse Lasers and Crystal Targeting Matrix. So these guys move 18 inches. They put out quite a bit of firepower, and what the Crystal Targeting Matrix means that I can hide them behind like line of sight and then zip them on out, and I can kind of get shots on things as long as they're the closest, and I'd ignore the penalties for heavy weapon firing. I had a Wasp Assault Walker. I actually had 2 Wasp Assault Walkers with Eldari missile launchers on them. And these can also deep strike, but the Eldari missile launcher I found was actually quite powerful because it was a strength 8 and it was a d6 damage, and most of the stuff I have here is kind of around the strength 6 variety. So it was actually quite powerful. The Wave Serpent, I had 2 Shuriken Cannons on it. Then I had a Spearhead, which had the same custom craft world, expert crafters and masterful shots. I had a Warlock on a Skyrunner. I had 2 support weapons, 2x3 Vibro Cannons. So I had basically 2 big blobs of 3 Vibro Cannons each. So the Vibro Cannons they got cover, which was good because they're only a 4-up save. And the Vibro Cannons they're really, really pretty gross, honestly, with expert crafters. And then I had 3 Wraith Lords to fill that out. One Wraith Lord had 2 Eldari missile launchers and a Ghost Glaive. The other one had 2 Star Cannons and a Ghost Glaive. And finally, I had my 3rd detachment was a Spearhead, and this was a different craft world because they have expert crafters, but I gave them masterful shots so they ignore cover. And you'll see why in a minute. So there's an Autarch in there, and he has a Warlord trait called Eye on Distant Events, which means he ignores Overwatch. And he has a relic called Fauci's Wing, which gives him 12 inches. He can move 12 inches, and he has Fly. So there's 3 Night Spinners in there with the Crystal Targeting Matrix. And then their support weapon, a 1 support weapon, which was the Shadow Weaver. So this is all my indirect fire. 3 Night Spinners and a Shadow Weaver. That's the total of my indirect fire. The reason why this isn't a separate detachment is because I want them to ignore cover, because Night Spinners on 4 are -4. Night Spinners on 6. So Night Spinners, when they wound on 6, it is -4 AP. But other than that, it's just a 0 AP. So a lot of the wounds they have to get 6 to wound to really do the big damage. But it's nice if they're going with 0 AP, at least it ignores cover. So Marines aren't getting at least a 2-up save. They're getting a 3-up save, for example. And of course, it's damage 2. So my army has a lot of damage 2. It's got a ton of firepower. The Vibro Cannons were quite gross. It has 3 Wraith Lords, and the reason I took the Wraith Lords was because, frankly, that's my favorite model, and I absolutely love them, and I needed something to kind of push the middle, to hold down a little bit chunk of the board. I needed some counter-assault threat, so that's kind of what the Wraith Lords are doing in there. And then I have a lot of movement and with the Wasps that can deep strike and they can also move, and also with the Hornets as well. I usually put both Dire Avengers inside the Wave Serpent, and oftentimes the Wave Serpent was my engineer along with Storm Guardians. And there were moments when I would just deep strike the Storm Guardians in turn 2 to put them somewhere, because they really don't do much except sit on an objective. So it was a pretty good list. I had played with different elements of that leading up to the Las Vegas Open, but when I submitted that list, I had never actually played with that specific part of it. I found in my testing, I had tried out 9 Vibro Cannons, and what I found was it was just too much. Vibro cannons need line of sight. They have 48 inches, but 9 of them it just fills up your deployment zone, and you can't quite get the angles you want for most table terrain. Most of the time, most tables you find at Las Vegas Open or just like decent terrain tables, there's usually two avenues of firing, and that was enough to put 3 here and 3 there. So I could get kind of shots down range, but having 9 vibro cannons was just too much. I also found that having 2 Wraith Lords was not enough, so I wanted to have 3 in there because Wraith Lords frankly die really easily. They don't have an invul. They have cover outside of 12, but for the most part, they do get taken care of pretty easily. And I gave them all 3 Ghost Glaives because I really wanted to just punch through Marines with those things. So it wasn't the most optimized list. I decided that I did not want to take flyers. I have 5 Craft World flyers. If I wanted to do that, I could have. But I decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do a little bit different, and I wanted to kind of play something slightly different. So my list has a ton of firepower. It's got a lot of counterpunch. It is a competitive list. I will say that I never felt like I was not in a game. It was definitely a punchy list, and it was a pure Craft World list, which is kind of what I appreciated, and that's really what I wanted to get out of it. But it also meant that I didn't have a big chunk of that painted before LVO. So back to Thursday. Thursday, I was painting things up. And it got to the point where I had to finish a bunch of bases for the Wraith Lords and the Wasps. And my basing technique is I put cork down, I put some base like rock material down, I spray them black, I put gray on it, I dry brush it, and then I glue like grass, like static grass on there. And so it's a multi-step process, and I didn't get started early enough. So about 10 minutes before having to rush out the door, I'm literally using Elmer's glue to glue the grass on these bases, but it wasn't drying. So I had to put each one in individual Ziploc bag and just put it in my luggage. So basically, inside my suitcase, there were 5 wet Elmer's glue bases drying with grass on them as I was flying into the Las Vegas Open. And when I pulled them out after I got into the hotel, it was still quite wet. So luckily I packed additional grass to actually put it down on there. So I knew at some point I really didn't want to, but there's always a point where I recognize that I have to stop doing what I'm doing as far as painting things, and I have to just pack the paint and then paint it in the hotel room. So sadly, I did that once, and I'm find myself relying on that more and more now every time I go to these big events. So Thursday, I packed everything up. I had half the stuff was mostly painted, but I had a lot of painting still left to do. So I packed all my paints. I packed all the stuff I'll need. So I flew in Thursday night and met with the other members of the team that I'm on, and had just a low-key night Thursday night. And then Thursday, I spent probably 2 hours at night getting my army ready to get painted. So I put together my army tray and finished up the paint that I wanted to get done for the army before the next day. So Friday, I played, went down to the hall bright and early like I always do. Usually give myself about an hour before the round starts just to kind of get my bearings, find a safe spot to put my army, and just kind of chat with some friends and just wait for the pairings to go up. The pairings went up like 30 minutes early, which was nice. And I played Patrick he had Eldar. His Eldar army had 3 Night Spinners, 3 Fire Prisms, and 4 Wave Serpents with Guardians. It was pretty straightforward. It was a pretty straightforward army. So the great thing about playing against an army that you know really well, it's just nice. It just has this level of comfort to it. You kind of know how things are going to go. And I haven't been playing the game long enough to have that feeling with everything, for example. So there are players that play a lot that feel comfortable with every single type of army out there, but that's not me. So this one, I'm like, okay, I get this. I understand exactly what his list is going to do. So he went first, was Hammer and Anvil. He pushed his Wave Serpents forward, and all 4 of them basically. And they did a lot of work, and he was kept firing in the back with like Fire Prisms and Night Spinners and things. But between the Wraith Lords kind of taking the center and also just the amount of firepower that my list kicks out, this was like the very first, it's the first time I played this specific list in a while this is where I learned that my list has a just gross amount of firepower. So basically, his first couple turns, he did really well. He got up on me, but once he lost the Wave Serpents, and I went after the Night Spinners, there wasn't a whole lot left. I kind of ignored the Fire Prisms. They did damage all game, but it was a good game against a great opponent, and because he's an Eldar player, and I was able to kind of swing it around after the first couple turns. The second game was against Imperial Fists. And if you've never played Imperial Fists before, wow. This is the first time I'd actually played against them. We don't have anyone locally that plays Imperial Fists. Imperial Fists ignore cover, so that means that a big chunk of my army that got cover outside of 12, well, that's kind of just gone. In Imperial Fists, their damage is increased when they're going against vehicles. And I happen to have a very heavy vehicle army. So against the Imperial Fist player, basically just got shot right off the table. There's some things I could have done to make it closer, and in retrospect, thinking about there's ways I could have played around his list, but I was just not ready for that amount of firepower. So it was basically it was over within probably about 4 turns or so. Try to make it a game, try to get as much points as I can, which is what you do in these kinds of things, and try to most importantly learn what would I do next time. But really, it was a really hard counter, and he just had a gross amount of firepower. So then there was the problem with BCP. So between game 2 and game 3, now the first game was a little bit, the pairings were acting a little funny, but we got game 2 out. Between game 2 and game 3, there was a pause, and it sort of drug on for a while. And we're like wondering, because you're just hanging out, and cool thing was me and Sean, Sean and I talked for a while. I'd never met him before, and we chatted the whole time about like, oh, here's how you paint yellow, and we just talked about hobby stuff because it's 40K. The game was an hour or so, and they still hadn't fixed it, and we're like, man, what is going on? And what had happened? Well, if you go to BCP and you go to their Facebook, they have a big, long kind of an apology and also a description of the technical issues that went into it. Needless to say, from a player perspective, what it entailed was we waited around for about an hour. The judges kind of sprung into action, and we all had to go up to the table with the person we played and report our scores manually. They had about 5 stations or 6 stations set up with judges that were literally writing names and the scores. So I'm like, Mark scored, I don't know, 18 or whatever. Sean scored 28 or 30 or something like that. Everybody had to go up in pairs to report their scores by hand, and the judges were writing them down all on pieces of paper. So that was the second hour. Everyone's kind of reporting the scores. And then I believe, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but they probably had to put all of that into an Excel sheet, and they posted the pairings about 3 hours later to the Facebook group, the Las Vegas Open Facebook group. They posted the new pairings with the table that you were at. So it was I think it was about a 3-hour delay, maybe a little longer, but I just know at some point it was like, well, we should be done with game 3 by now. It really was a bummer. And it was a bummer, and because otherwise the event really, really ran smooth. It was the one sort of technical hiccup that unfortunately was a big technical hiccup. And it kind of sucked some of the energy out of the room a little bit, because everyone, by the time you get your second game in, you're really just raring to go. And a lot of people had plans that evening that they had the option. The next day, they could have showed up at 7 a.m. to play their third game. But I think a lot of people just stuck it out and played their game. I'd be interested to see how many people dropped after game 2. I know a couple that were just like, I'm just going to go ahead and drop now because, I've got plans this evening, which is kind of a bummer. It's unfortunate that it happened. So I don't know exactly. Hopefully they'll have that fixed, but this is the second year in a row where they've had kind of problems with the pairings and the BCP app. So we'll see what comes of this. Usually things have to get worse before they get better. So optimistically speaking, hopefully things will get better. But my game 3 was against Cody, and he had Chaos. And Cody had the classic Bash Brothers list. He had Magnus, he had Morty, he had Poxwalkers, he had Typhus, he had some Terminators, and he basically said, well, this is a list I took last year. And so it was a ton of fun. We had table quarters, and he went first, and he did exactly what you do when you have that list is Magnus and Morty fly up the board as fast as they can. Everything else kind of sits back and holds objectives. Now, the thing about it was that it was going really well for him, except that Magnus failed Armon failed to cast Weaver Fates on Magnus. Weaver Fates is what gives Magnus the +1 invul that goes from 4 up to 3 up, and it is the most crucial power to get off. I actually was waiting to deny it. It was the last power he cast. He failed it, CP rerolled, failed it again, and once Magnus does not have that 3+ invul and he's right there, right in front of your lines, he's dead. So that's what happened. So, I mean, I was going to go after him anyway, even if he had a 3-up invul, it didn't matter. I was going to put everything into him, but because he only had a 4-up invul, I was able to put more, direct half my firepower into Morty because Magnus died much sooner than he normally would. So basically, he lost Magnus my first shooting phase. Morty, it took a couple turns to go to finally kill him. He was tough, like he is. He was passing a lot of feel no pains, but he finally died and took I don't know how many vehicles with him because he exploded. My vehicles exploded. It was a fun, glorious time. But once those two guys are down, by turn 3, it's kind of more of an academic exercise of more of cleanup and making sure you're getting as many points as you can. So I ended my first day 2-1. I had won 2 games, one against Eldar, one against Chaos, and lost the game against Imperial Fist. So Friday night, I think by the time I got out of there, it was like 11 o'clock. It was late, maybe closer to midnight. The team went to where we would normally go to and had dinner that night, and I was actually really hungry, and that was probably the best dinner I've had in a long time because I was starving and kind of buzzing from all the different, the activity of the day. So went to bed a little bit late and then got up Saturday for the next day. So we had to wait for pairings again. Normally pairings will go up between the Friday and Saturday, and that's the other bummer about BCP is because they had to hand pair it. I mean, imagining eventually they got him into BCP, but it's nice to know who you're playing the next day. You can look at their list and kind of strategize a little bit about it, but we just didn't know until we got there. So my game 4, I played against Ben Cromwell, who is a local player who is playing the AdMech list. I would have pretty much copied his list had I gone with AdMech instead of Eldar. Kind of a bummer to go all the way there and play a local player. And not only that, Ben is a really good player, and he did exceptionally well with that particular AdMech army that he had, and I've never beaten him. So that was a pretty quick game. That was as much like the Imperial Fist game. The 2 games I lost fairly quickly, mostly just got blown off the board. My game 5 was against Schuyler, who had the possessed bomb, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a big unit of possessed with some tricks to make them untargetable, but also the things you can target are really difficult to hit. So that was a really, really fun technical game. I'd never played against this list either, but I kind of knew a little bit about it, and I sort of understood how it worked, but that was probably one of my favorite games. That was a nail biter down to the end. I only won by a couple points, and that was really me having to really kind of think about exactly how I wanted to play it. It was the two of us neither of our dice were particularly hot or particularly cold. It was just trying to get the edge that we could. So really the reason why I think he lost that game is the secondaries he picked were all the way in my backfield, and he didn't get back there until the very end of the game. By then he didn't have much left from his possessed. My last game was against Jeremy, and he took a Raven Guard list, and I also had not played Raven Guard. I was usually only playing Iron Hands locally. This Raven Guard list had aggressors, it had Centurions, it had Shrike in it, which I love because Shrike is awesome. It was a pure Raven Guard list. And, it was one of those, it felt like I had control of this game for a big chunk of it. And in fact, he really didn't have much left by the very, turn 6. I actually thought that I had won this game. And the last turn, I kind of failed to move some stuff. I'm like, okay, we'll just go through this, go through the motions here. But what I failed to do is I failed to kill a single scout who weathered a ton of firepower, Had I decided to move my Dire Avengers into range and cut a shot at him, maybe would have killed him, but this single hero, Scout of the Imperium, lived, and then I didn't get the kill that turn that I needed, so this was turn 6. And I remember going through the scores and thinking to myself, okay. So I said, all right, Jeremy, I want you to go ahead and calculate your scores because we each had score sheets. Tell me exactly what you come up with before I say anything. And he goes and he counts it up and he goes, I think we're tied at 26. I'm like, that's exactly what I have. So we tied it. Tying at 26 is not easy. That means there's a lot of points that we both scored. But he was happy that he tied the game. I was happy because it was a great game. And, at the end of the day, it was a lot of fun. So if I look back at all 6 of my opponents, it is exactly what I hoped to get out of the LVO, which was I had 6 really good, tough, competitive games against people that really knew their lists well, that knew kind of what they were doing, and very minimal rules questions. We both tried our best, and we both played hard, and we both got kind of a good game out of the experience. And so after, at the end of my LVO, I won 3, I lost 2, and I tied 1, which to me is a good record for me. I mean, it's technically a winning record, and I'll take the technically winning any day. So that was my LVO experience for Friday and Saturday. Now, Sunday I played in the RTT, and the Sunday RTT is kind of fun because basically you get matched up in these little pods of 8. So the first 8 players walk around, they just kind of grab you and group you into a pod of 8, and it's single elimination. So in past years, I've played the RTT, and I usually lose the first game, so I get a single game in, and then I'm out. This year, my first game was with Andrew. Andrew had a Knights Army, and unfortunately, I seized. It was Hammer and Anvil, and I seized on him. So Andrew is a listener, so Andrew, if you're listening, hey, hope you made it back okay, safe and sound. He came over from the UK. So, but I seized on him, which was unfortunate because I could kill at least one of his knights before he got to me. He had a Valiant, and every single time I see a Valiant on the table, I know that I need to have a Valiant because the Valiant is cool. And once the Valiant gets in the range to do the things that a Valiant does, which is murder things in short range, and it was also Hawkshroud too, so even when it dies, it murders things more. It is just a sight to behold. I mean, it is such a cool model. So, but in general though, because I went first, I was able to take one of his knights down, his Crusader, his Gallant, and his Valiant. Did a ton of damage, but it's not enough given the amount of army that I have. So it was a fantastic game. Andrew was a great opponent, and it was just a pleasure to play against knights because I do love knights and I love that Valiant. So my game 2 was against Heath, who's also another listener. He's from Hawaii, and he had a Dark Eldar army, and he actually didn't play in the Champions. I think he said he did some hobby events, which was fantastic. But I played him on Sunday, and he had a Dark Eldar army, and he really quite outplayed me mission-wise. This was me. I was probably like, oh, okay, I understand this army. I was not paying nearly enough attention, and he just outplayed me via the mission. So I remember though, I think it was like probably turn 4, maybe 3. And we didn't have a whole lot of time left. And the person who won, whichever one of us won, would have to play our last game. And we looked over, and it was a Marine army. And I'm like, so Heath, you want to play that Marine army? And he goes, oh, not really. But I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to either. But let's go ahead and play this out. He won because he just did really well, getting the points in the early turns. We kind of finished it, and I'm like, Heath have a lot of fun with that Marine army. I didn't mind losing my second game at the RTT, and I met 2 great players. I met Andrew and I met Heath. So after the RTT, we watched. I watched the last matchup, and that was pretty much it for the LVO. One of the things that was interesting this year is, in previous years, the player conduct was kind of an issue, but over the last couple LVOs and also competitive events, they've done a very good job of coming up with a code of conduct policy. The judges are much more active, and they have the tools to actively enforce the rules with the code of conduct, and they have yellow cards and red cards that they can whip out at any time. They went beyond the call of duty when BCP crashed as well. So having to hand pair all that stuff and then having to go through and grind through and not only collect all that information from all those players, but to get the pairings turned around as fast, as smooth as they possibly could have. The judges this year, I think I understand they're probably not getting paid for this, but they probably should have, because at this point they went way above and beyond the call of duty to just to do well with this event. They were active. They were all over the place. It didn't take long to get one. And all the stuff that they had to do at the very was scrambling for pairings and stuff. I just think the judges this year just knocked it out of the park. They did a great job. And I happen to know quite a few of them, so you guys did a great job this year. Now, the very last matchup was between Richard Siegler and Brad Chester, and they're both Marine players. Richard Siegler he's from Team Brohammer. He had the quote-unquote list that I think they all took. It was a Iron Hands list with 3 Chaplain Dreads, a Leviathan, and a bunch of Marines and some other stuff. I mean, it was a really tough Iron Hands list. Brad Chester had a Raven Guard list with, I think, 2 or 3 units of Centurions. Now, last year, we got Brandon Grant with Guard and the Castellan against Alex Harrison with Eldar with a ton of flyers, with 6 flyers and scatter bikes. I think last year was probably the best final game that I will see at LVO. I mean, there may be something in the future that tops it, but I don't know, because I don't think so. It was a fantastic game. To me, it was 2 players that were top players playing very different lists against each other, and neither of them were making a lot of mistakes. It wasn't like luck was swinging one way or the other. It was just the way it kind of fell down. It went all the way down to the very last minute. And that was last year. This year, you had 2 Marine players that played to the mission. And I think there was maybe 12 inches of movement total between the 2 of them. And it just was not nearly as interesting. From a technical standpoint, I think if you understood the missions and you understood 40K, it was cool to kind of see the choices they made. But if you're just somebody who doesn't know anything about 40K and you're kind of used to, and you're expecting some really interesting action, it really was not that interesting of a game. Like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of movement. There wasn't even that much shooting. It was very specific, small things, and it had the worst thing I think that the game has right now, and that's called the unkillable Leviathan Dreadnought. At the very end of the game, Brad Chester had to kill the Leviathan Dreadnought in order to win, because it was a tie game, but Richard Siegler had killed more models than Brad, so Brad had to kill the Leviathan. So he put everything into this Leviathan. And just to give you a sense of exactly why this Leviathan is unkillable, let's go through the stats and kind of why it becomes an unkillable thing. It is T8. It has a 2-up save and a 4-up invul. There is a strat that allows dreadnoughts to take half damage. So let's say you punch through, and you wound the dreadnought and you do 6 damage on it. The strat takes that 6 and goes down to 3. Then there is a relic that the Iron Hands have, which is called the Iron Stone. And the Iron Stone reduces the damage by 1. So that same strength, or that same damage 6 attack goes to 3, goes to 2. So it goes from 6 to 2. So only 2 damage is getting through. Then you have, Iron Hands have this, have a strat that allows you to transfer and pass off wounds to infantry. And unfortunately, it's not limited. Like, as you're not limited to from one infantry to the other. It says character to infantry. It's like a Tau drone strat. So the thing about the Leviathan, though, is you can make it a character, which gives it a warlord trait and makes it a character. So you can use this thing called cogitated martyrdom. And so any kind of an infantry unit that's within 3 inches of a character, any failed wounds, if the character would lose a wound, let's say it lost 2 of those wounds from that damage 6 attack, on a 2+, the other model actually intercepts it and suffers 1 mortal wound for each of those wounds. So basically 2 wounds will go to 2 mortals. Now, this unkillable Leviathan Dreadnought is surrounded by Intercessor Marines, which have 2 wounds each. So you can see where this is going. Rochester shot everything into this Leviathan and failed to kill it. It is, when I say it's unkillable, it's essentially unkillable. Now, the Leviathans only have 24-inch range, so there is a limitation there, but I just feel like there shouldn't be anything in the game that approaches Death Star levels of durability, and that's kind of what we have with the situation right now. That is at the top tables, and that is kind of what a lot of the top players are seeing. However, as I went through and kind of recounted all my experience, I'm not seeing that. You don't see that in the kind of tables that I'm playing at. I'm playing the middle tables. I'm playing people that want to do well, but they're not top players. They have armies they like and enjoy, but that's who I'm playing. And to me, even though I think the final game was a little bit kind of dull, and it had, to me, a pretty egregious unit, a Leviathan Dreadnought that is unkillable, that's not been my personal play experience. That's what you see is kind of broadcast out there because that's what is on the stream and that's what is the top tables and it's being reported. But for most players, you don't ever see that kind of thing. You have the kind of games that I did. You have 6 games against great opponents. You have Patrick with his Eldar, and Sean with his Imperial Fists, and Cody with Chaos, and Ben with Admech, and Shyler with Chaos, and Jeremy with Raven Guard. 6 fantastic opponents. That was my experience. And the second day RTT with Andrew with his Knights and Heath with his Dark Eldar. Those are all fantastic games. And I always come away having had just a better experience as a result of it. And I don't see some of the stuff that you see in some of the gross, really, really gross, strong lists. So despite the fact that I think the current Marines, that particular current list is, I guess, quote unquote broken, I'm not going to play against it. So to me, it doesn't really matter as much. And I think against most of the players that go to the Las Vegas Open, it's just like, yeah, that sucks, but that's not my experience. All right. So let's take a break. I'm going to hear for a word from our sponsor, TradeArray.com. If you're like most Warhammer players, you own a ton of models. At one time, you had big plans for these models, but now they just kind of sit, gathering dust, unused and unloved. It's time to clean out your closet of shame. Visit TradeArray.com and get cash for your used models. TradeArray is run by Captain A, someone who's been in the community a long time and has done a lot to grow the hobby. He's also a personal friend of the show. Unopened boxes, models on a sprue, half-built models, primed, painted, even bits have value. The process is simple. Send him a list of what you have, he'll send you a quote, you pack it up, send in your stuff, and he'll get you cash. You can shop around, but you're going to find that TradeArray gives you 40% more than the other guys. You want it quick, you want to get rid of it, visit TradeArray.com. Get cash to buy the stuff that you really want. TradeArray.com. Sell your models and get your cash quick and easy. Okay, and I'm back. So, I'm going to talk about my expectations for a Las Vegas Open. My expectations are really, I want to get 6 good games in, and I want to meet cool people, and I want to have a weekend sort of immersed in Warhammer. And by all those metrics, it was a success. It was a great social experience, hanging out with the team that I'm on. I got a chance to get 8 games over the course of a weekend, which I don't normally get. I get a game a month or maybe a game in, every other week. For the most part, even when I go to League, I'm not always playing. I'm not getting the games in that I always want to get in. So it's fantastic to have a short condensed period to get 8 games in. And it's just a way to be immersed in Warhammer for a while. And it's always worth it. It's interesting so from Thursday to Sunday night, you see Warhammer players, and they're pretty easy to spot. Warhammer players do have a certain look to them that is very different from the typical casino patron at Bally's. It's always funny to walk back and forth from the elevators to the convention hall with my army tray with all my plastic miniatures, my Eldar army laid out. You always get looks, and everyone's like, "What is that?" I mean, people are really interested in it. The civilians, so to speak, every time they see it, they're just amazed by what it is that we're doing. It's really cool to be part of Warhammer 40K. It's very unique. It's a very niche hobby, and it is something that I think people are really interested in. It's just something that takes a lot of effort and dedication, but people are interested in the amount of work you put into it and sort of how much you devote to this hobby. It's interesting to people. If somebody else is into it, you can talk for hours about just Warhammer 40K. And that is something that I love about the Las Vegas Open is you meet a lot of new people that you never would have met if you just stayed home and played with your local gaming group. You meet new people, you get in great games, and at the end of the day, it's always going to be a must-attend event for me because it's an hour and a half plane ride. It's fairly cheap by Southwest standards. It's always going to be something I'm always going to make. Now, my lesson that I learned this year is, because every year I learn something. What I learned this year was you take an army that you enjoy and you know how to play. It was great that I was able to kind of switch to Craft World Eldar at the last minute. But even thinking about Marines, I probably should have just not bothered thinking about playing Marines. I was getting sidetracked a little bit. I was really excited for the Marines because when they first came out, but I probably should have just kind of carried on with either AdMech or Craft World. But I think from now on, for any big event, I'm going to take an army that I enjoy and I know how to play. Jeff Poole made the top tables with orcs, and that was something that no one saw coming. But Jeff is very, very good playing that particular list. So I'm not a good enough player to try out new things. I need to kind of stick with tried and true, and need to have kind of a pool of units that I can have ready as I narrow my list down. So it's not so much that I have this perfect list all done. It's just that what's the core of my list going to be and what do I build around it? Maybe I have 300 points that I kind of play with toward the end that I'm still tweaking, around December timeframe, but I really just need to have a core of an army that I am kind of practicing, around the fall time that I feel really comfortable with. After points adjusting and FAQs and everything, and after chapter approved, I can make the final tweaks, but those should be fine-tuning. I really need to just commit to an army ahead of time rather than get distracted by kind of something different. So winning at least 3 games is really my goal. That's really it. As long as I can win 3 games, I feel like I did okay. Sometimes I have visions of winning 5. Sometimes in my crazy dreams, I think, it'd be so cool to make top 8 one day. But honestly, I think winning 3 games is enough for me. If I do better than that, great. I almost did this year, but at least 3 games is enough. And also, I want to have an army that I have well painted and that people comment on. And that is the thing about taking, a well-painted army is that everyone there, and even the people that are walking around, they're fans of the game, they're fans of the models, and they'll comment and they'll tell you that, hey, your army looks great, or hey, I really like what you did there. And to me, that is really a reinforcement of the time and effort that I put into painting those things. And so I want a good-looking army that I know really well, and I can win at least 3 games. And from now on, that's been kind of my expectation, but that's really what I'm going to focus on for the Las Vegas Open from now till whenever I stop going. Finally, the last goal is I want to meet 6th grade opponents. That's just it. And I think that a lot of your experience with people stems from what you project out there. So to me, if I meet 6th grade opponents, then I'm really, really happy. So that was my LVO experience. I recognize that I'm a sort of casual competitive player. You sort of understand kind of where you sit, but I'm not going to ever be like one of the top players, and that's okay. And I think I kind of came to that conclusion this weekend. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble on a little bit about my personal LVO experience. I do love to hear from our listeners, so please feel free to message us on Facebook or email us at thebattlehosts@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us, you can help us in a few different ways. You can tell your friends about us and like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can leave a review on iTunes, which does help to boost our listening audience. Finally, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thebattlehosts. For as little as $1 a month, you can help us with the cost of running the show and staying engaged with the 40K community. So thanks for listening to Battlehosts. Remember to be a better gamer and build a better community. Good night.